ganska nära mikrofonen.
Bueno, antes de empezar a hablar en inglés, I will speak in English, but I feel a bit kind of cantador flamenco, you know, like it's sitting here with microphone and everything, such beat like that, you know.
A little bit nearer.
Yeah, okay. It's okay. Do you hear me? Everyone hear me? Okay. All right, so let's begin then. I think it's a great privilege for all of us to be here today and share this hour with Antonio Muñoz Molina, as you know, one of the most prominent writers in Spain today. For many reasons, I will say that to read Antonio Muñoz Molina is to approach in a certain manner to the Spanish contemporary culture, and it is for many reasons, not only for his literary works, for his literary specific characteristics of all his works, but also for the manner he's dealing with culture, Spanish culture in contemporary Spain. So for many reasons, I think it's an enormous privilege to be here today and share this hour with him. I have some notes written in English just in order to introduce things a bit. So for all of you that don't know him very well.
A bit nearer.
Yeah, okay. I prefer to talk without it, but anyway, it's not so. I don't like it anyway. So I think I will read this first introduction and then we're gonna share some questions with him to establish kind of dialogue with him and with two of his translators of his works into Swedish, which is, I think, an enormous task, and as we will discuss later as well, a controversial one, according to some of the questions we have decided to have today. Okay, so his first novel, Beatus Ille, appeared in 1986, although it was conceived for several years. In novel appears the imaginary city of Machina, a sort of symbolic representation of the author's place of birth, Úbeda, that will reappear in other works in the future, in other books in fact. In this book, Muñoz Molina tells the story of Minaya, a young man who returns to Machina to write his doctoral thesis about the poet Jacinto Solana, killed in the Civil War, but whose exciting life will lead him to a series of inquiries that will result in a masterly ending. Muñoz Molina recalls the role played by the compilation of his articles in the publication of his first novel and, in general, in the definition of his written career. In 1987, he won the Critics' Prize of the National Narrative Award for his book The Winter in Lisbon, and in 1991 the Premio Planeta for the Polish writer, a novel for which then he returns to obtain the National Narrative Award the following year. In 2007 he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the University of Jaén in recognition to all his works. I myself, I think that he, I mean, you have honoris causa also in two American universities, as far as I know. Yeah. Other outstanding works of are Beltenebros, 1989, a novel of love, intrigue, and political matters set in the post-war Madrid. Pilar Miró, in fact, made a film about this novel, and I think it was a really successful film at the time. The Mystery of Madrid, published in 1992, initially as a serial of chapters in the newspapers in El País. The title refers to the 19th century opera The Mystery of Paris by Eugène Sue. The Owner of the Secret, 1994, Full Moon, 1997, as well. I mean, there is a movie about this novel too, made in this case by Manuel Uribe, a prominent director, I think. The Windows of Manhattan, 2004, or The Wind of the Moon, 2006. Those are some of the most representative novels by Antonio Muñoz Molina, of course. In 2009, he published La Noche de los Tiempos. I think this is one of his masterpieces, I have to say. It's a very dense book with a lot of information about different aspects related to the Spanish Second Republic and all the periods. I think it's, in fact, I would propose to translate this book into Swedish at some point in the future, but I have to say that in this case the task is a huge one. I mean, it's a really huge task to translate that book for many reasons. specifically as well for it's a very long book in that case. In 1995, he was elected member of the Royal Spanish Academy, as we know in Spanish, the RAE, to occupy the chair U. The speech he delivered to entry in the institution was devoted to talk about the experience of exile, more precisely about the writer Max Aub as another one of those Spanish who exiled during war and the dictatorship. In 2012, he donated part of his writings to the National Library, such as the notebooks taken from the books and newspapers, drafts and novels, unpublished poems written in his youth, and an unpublished theater play written in 1974. In 2013, specifically the year, we shared a couple of emails. I was telling you that before the little story. I have to say that's something that I found in that moment when I was working in a project in the University of Aarhus. In that time I was teaching there in Denmark. I remember that someone we work with memory, so we should invite Antonio Muñoz Molina to be here with us, at least in the Congress, to have a dialogue, an open dialogue with him about memory and related to his writing as well. And I have to say that I wrote him in that moment without any person in the middle to establish the contact, and it really surprised me. Not because of me. I mean, you expect when you write someone like him something kind of different, you know. I really got surprised for how humble he was, how direct, clear, honest. I think it was like reading one of his books. In fact, you know, I'm talking right now more like a reader than a critic. I mean, part of my work is related to memory studies, in fact, and Spanish literary, modern literature, contemporary literature, and specifically Antonio Muñoz Molina is one of the cornerstones of our research projects. You know, so when I see Antonio Muñoz Molina through that perspective, it's different, because in that case I'm a researcher and a critic. To set in the position of a reader is different, because then the relationship established is quite different. But when you read one of his emails, at that time you have to keep them, I think, that was kind of established in a conversation with one of his novels in a way. It was a certain manner to know, to be closer to the writer, and to be closer specifically to the man. I think it was great in that time. By the way, he refused to come to Aarhus, I have to say. but that was because, and this is what I was about to say, in that year, and specifically during that time, he was honored with the award. I mean, he awarded the Premio Príncipe de Asturias de las Letras in Spain. So, I mean, he is absolutely excused for not attending the meeting. You know, because we all can understand that that's also a privilege. You know, it's one of the highest awards you can receive according to the Spanish cultural, canons, I think. So, in order to break the ice, I don't know if this expression works in English. It works perfectly in Spanish. I think so, but anyway. I'm going to ask him a couple of questions, just or 3 questions maybe, and after that I'm going to have also the privilege to introduce introduce Elisabeth and Manni, who are the translator of Antonio Muñoz Molina into Swedish, and to establish a debate with you all. About his works and the translations of his works into Swedish. The first one is related to specifically La Memoria Novelada. I had the opportunity to work with Elide Pitarello a couple of times, a good friend of mine. I'm absolutely sure that you know her perfectly as well. And the importance of memory in your works. I mean, how important is that in your works? Because we can see how memory comes out in many occasions in all your literary production.
Well, thank you. Hello. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Thanks my friend Gaspar, who has become my editor, and Eleanor, his co-editor, co-publisher, excuse me. And this is my first time in Stockholm, so I'm quite happy being here, meeting my translators, meeting the professor, who I'm sorry not to have attended this conference at Aarhus, because in fact, as I think I told you, I had already been to Aarhus, yes, and I had a great time there. So there were strong reasons for me to get back to Aarhus, but In fact, I had something else to do at the time. No? Well, you're asking me about memory and its place in the writing. It has all to do with my experience, with my growing up at the time I grew up. No? I was born in Andalusia in 1956. No? Andalusia in the south of Spain, and in the probably the most backward province in Andalusia at the time, who was the province of Jaén. I come from a working class peasant family, and I was born 20 years after the beginning of the Civil War. No? So when I was a child, my surroundings were full of stories and memories about the past. No, it was the atmosphere was breathing all the time. No, there was no. It was something that was breathing since I started having memory. No? And I remember that not only the things that people told, but the things they didn't tell. No? I remember that people. I mean, when you are a child and there were a lot of comic books at the time called Hazañas Bélicas, no? And it was comic books about the American soldiers in World War II, no? We were used to this kind of heroism, no? We associated war with films and with comic books, but mysteriously, my grandfather, who was a peasant at the time, and my father talk about the war, no? So this thing, the war, was something actually connected to the people I knew, to the people I was living with, no? So it was part of the landscape, no? I was lucky enough to have my maternal grandfather was a wonderful narrator, wonderful oral narrator. No, they hardly could read or write, but they were extraordinary narrators. No? So this man told me stories all the time. No? Mentioned names of people from the war, no? From names of historical characters who for me were a kind of fantasy characters. No? He spoke about President Azaña, no? Don Juan Negrín, no? Prieto, all these people who have been important during the war. No? So my child imagination was full of these stories. No? And when I decided, or not decided, but found myself willing to become a writer in a very natural way, the material I had to deal with mostly the material I've been growing up with since I was a child. No? All these stories that were into my mind because they were repeated quite often. No? The story of people who have been chased, who have been killed, people who have returned from the war. There was a great story about an uncle of my father who had returned from the war by himself. No? Se había vuelto de la guerra. No? It's like when you come back from school because you decide not to go to school that day. No? This man, whom I knew, was someone who has simply decided that he didn't want to have nothing to do with the war, so he came back home. I met him. I said, how can you come back from war like that, no? And he said, I was in the cavalry. He was a peasant as well, no? He was in the cavalry. They gave me this beautiful horse, and I thought, how becoming would be this horse for me to work on the farm, no? And I thought, all these beautiful horses being killed, no, by the bombs and and what I'm doing here. So he was riding on a column, and at a certain point, he turned back. He turned back home like that, no? And my father told me when he was at the farm, no, he saw something coming from afar. No, he saw this small figure coming in the distance, someone riding a horse. It was his uncle. He said, "What do you do? Why are you in the war?" I said, "Oh, I came back from the war." I had this great horse, and I decided it was not worth losing it in the war. No? So it was all these kinds of stories, because when you listen to the stories that peasants tell about wars and things like that, there is something that is always absent from them, which is heroism. Heroism and ideology. No, they didn't care. They didn't give a shit about ideology. They were peasants. They were cannon fodder. So they had this ironic or sarcastic image of the war, no? Of the foolishness of the war. No? So all these stories were in my mind all the time. No? And then I started reading people like Juan Rulfo. I read Juan Rulfo's stories about Mexico, about the Cristero Wars in Mexico in the 30s. No? And I saw how he dealt with this material, no? That most likely came from his own memory. No? And then I read also William Faulkner, who was a great influence on me. I read Absalom, for example, no? And I realized that what was special about William Faulkner writing about the American Civil War was the distance in time. So Faulkner was born in 1997, I think. He was born there, 97, I think. Yeah. He was born at that time. No? So, what was his knowledge? Where did his knowledge about the war came from? This knowledge came from stories told to him by his family, by his parents, by his grandparents, by the servants of the house. All these stories came to him filtered by two generations' narratives and memories. No? So, rather than testimonies, direct testimonies about the war, these stories were kind of fables, had become, in a very natural way, had become almost fiction, because they were passed along generation to generation. So that was my position with respect to this Spanish past, no? And this is the strongest influence in my education as a writer. There is also, if you allow me, it has to do with the time I started writing and publishing. No? At that time, the people of my generation, we came of age in the early 70s. So our youth coincided with the arrival of democracy in Spain. We became adult at the same time that we became citizens. And we needed to find what is called in English a useful past, a usable past. No? We needed to get back in time to find our own tradition, because we rejected, strongly, violently rejected, the Francoist tradition that had been given to us, imposed on us. So we needed to get back far in time till the time of the Spanish Republic. No? So we needed to connect with this past. And this effort has to do with, on the one hand, you learn by reading history. But on the other hand, you need to make this time yours by imagining it. So the way you get to own the past in a way. It's not by reading history, but by figuring out, by being able or trying to figure out what it was like being there. So it has been very, very strong drive throughout my life as a writer.
In fact, I will say that one of your crucial works is Sefarat. I know that tomorrow you're gonna have an extensive conversation about this work, but I consider one of the most representative of your production, specifically for many reasons. In fact, memory, identity. In fact, so how identity deals with memory in a book like that. This is the question. In fact, and how important is that work in all your production in order to understand in a better way your own visions about the Spanish even situation today about memory, how this is possible to say.
Well, you know that the past, Faulkner said famously, no? The past is not dead, it's not even past. This is a very famous statement of him, no? So every day we realize that the past is not dead, it's not even past, no? Every day in Spain and every day in Europe, in a very scary way. No? I was in Berlin with my wife. They were premiering a piece of theater written by there these days, and when you are in Berlin and you read the news, and you see you take a walk in Berlin around Unter der Linden and the old Reichstag, And then you get back to the hotel and you turn on the TV and you see this demonstration in Warsaw. So the first part of the morning you were in the safe territory of history. But then you get to the hotel and watch TV and you are no longer in the past. You are in the present. And you see these 200,000 people in Warsaw, no? Raising their arms and claiming the white supremacy somehow, no? And so the memory is a very tricky, an ever trickier issue, no? You know that in Spain, a few years ago people started to say that the war had never been mentioned after Franco's death, no? That there had been this pact of silence, no? That nothing had been mentioned, nothing had been told, because there was this agreement to silence the past in order to build a new system, no? Every time a regime changes, the relationship with the past is a very tricky issue to deal with, no? Because as David Reef, the wonderful writer who has written David Reef is Susan Sontag's son, no? But you may know he's a great writer in his own right, no? And he has a book called In Defense of Oblivion. And he says that sometimes justice and peace cannot be achieved at the same time. In the transitions from regimes, from dictatorship to democracy, especially when dictatorship had taken as long as it took in Spain, no? So it has always been difficult to deal with these issues, no? And it was not true that there was a silence about the past. In fact, people started to say that only in the 2000s had been possible to write novels about the Civil War. That was not true. I mean, since the 60s, even within Spain, there have been published important novels from the point of view of the defeated, of the Republican defeated, no? So in the 70s, and I myself, my first novel, the one you mentioned first, was published in 1986. So it's a novel dealing directly with the war, with memory, with the problem in the 80s. The problem in the 80s and in the 90s was not a pact of silence. It was not that the old Francoist forces were somehow lurking on Spain and preventing the reality from being known. The sad problem was that very few people cared. Very few people cared about the past, because it happens very often, immediately after some conflict. What most people want is to put things behind, because you had very tough things ahead. You had you had to build a new society. So how do you manage this balance between building a working system, a working democratic system, and at the same time paying justice to those who suffered in the past, no? I think that the problem in Spain in the 80s was fashion. Spain in the 80s was completely taken by the superstition of modernity. We wanted to be as modern as possible. We wanted all to be Almodovar-like characters, no? We wanted to be, it was a time when people said that Spain is fashionable in the world, no? And up to a point, it's understandable. And I remember that when I started writing and publishing this kind of stuff, no? People said to me, when this novel came out, no? Some critics said to me, an important critic at the time, but why dealing again with the Civil War? Because it wasn't fashionable. This is the truth. And it was unfair. It was unfair because at the time, many people who had suffered the dictatorship were still alive. And there were some things that were done for them. This grandfather of mine that I mentioned to you had been a member of the police force, in the Republican police force during the Republic, no? And in his early 80s, he was happy enough to receive a long due pension for having been a policeman during the Republic. So some things were done, but not enough. And many things might have been done at the time. There were pensions that might have been paid to people who had suffered, who had spent years in jail. There might have been honors, memorials, things that were not done at the time, because there is only a very short span of time when you can do some actual justice, simply because people die. And people die especially when the dictatorship has taken so long. No? So now, what is the situation we are now? we are finding out is that many of the issues that weren't dealt with in the past are back again, no? And but I think we are learning to deal with them. And one of the things we are learning is that, incredibly, some people in Spain still tell you that why should we remove the past? Why should we move Franco's tomb? And this is unbelievable. I mean, this is a dictator. This is a dictator's tomb. This is a monument to the victory of fascism in the country. So this is something that should have been fixed a long time ago. No? Now we have to do it because we didn't that in the past. But it doesn't mean that we have not been able to tell the stories we had to tell. It's not like that, because I can testify that in the 70s, in the 80s, if you were willing to tell stories about the past, about the war, about the Republic, you could perfectly do it. And you even could find an audience.
Well, I think just for a reason of time, basically, I would just, I think that the ice is absolutely melt right now. Thanks to Antonio Muñoz Molina and the way he's just so generous in the responses. I really appreciate that, of course. But I think I have some more questions, but I prefer to keep it for me just in case, and maybe just to later, if some of you wants to make a question, so that is going to be your time to make it. So I will just go now to talk about the translations into Swedish, because this is, well, I mean, this is the main reason to be here today. And in that case, I have to introduce Elisabeth Helms. I'm sorry, I have not my glasses here, and it's just, I forgot. sorry so much. Manni Kössler, of course, and they are the two of the translators from Antonio Muñoz Molina into Swedish, which is a huge task, as I said before. The first question, we were talking about that before because it's a bit controversial. I consider translation a very, very important task in society in general, because translator, as you know, is a kind of, they constitute a sort of bridge between a culture to bring ideas. I mean, the soul of the culture, if I might say, to another culture. So I think it's a very, very important. They have an important role in our society. How, in what manner can I read, for example, Proust in Spanish if I can't read French, for example? This is a case. Or Antonio Muñoz Molina if you cannot read Spanish. How? In what way? So translation is a huge. It has a huge responsibility for all of them in that case, and this is the way I like to trade it. I think it's even I would say that a very bad paid job. I think it should be paid better. I think so. Really, it doesn't mean that they are not. I don't know anything about that, but I really consider that it's a very bad paid job. A job, I mean. The first question, this controversial question we were talking before, it's about to understand the way we should understand translation, the profession, you know, as an art or as a science in that case. So I know it's a huge one and it's controversial, but what do you think about that in that case? Also to break the ice.
Well, we were discussing this, and this is of course a question that translators can meet and discuss all night and go out and never talk to each other after that because they are so angry at each other. So, but to me, I don't feel like I'm doing an art. I feel my goal is transparency, to be invisible in some way, and that's of course a big lie. You can't be transparent as a translator, because in that goal it also means that I want to make the text as Swedish, as idiomatically Swedish as possible. And if I do that, I, in certain way, I betray the author. But and there are other schools. There are schools that say, no, we should leave the feeling of the German, the Spanish, whatever it is. But this is my idea of the thing, and I know there are many different ways of looking at this.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I've been in many talks with other translators about this during the years. If someone asks me, are you an artist or are you a technician? I'm neither, and I'm both, I should say. I'm an artisan, maybe, in my way of translating. And if you give the same original text, the same text to different translators, you get different texts back. So it's the same as giving notes to different musicians, and you get different music back, maybe, or different interpretations of the same music. So yeah, that's it. And in this, having to do with this, I must say that I translated the first 2 books by Muñoz Molina into Swedish, which were Libros and Lisboa. Yes, I forgot. Vinter I Lissabon in Swedish, and Mörkrets herre. And it was one of the first translations I did, and I just reread it. It's about 30 years ago. That was also a very strange and painful experience. I would have done it differently, not totally, but I can see now that if I'd done it today, it's not that many grave mistakes, but if I'd done it today, I would have had the courage to be a little more, have a little more distance, if you can say that, to the original text in a way, and have more confidence maybe in my own language. So I think it would have been better, I'm sorry to say, but that's how it is. It's a long time ago.
I'm sorry to say that if I reread the novel, I will say the same thing.
Thank you.
This time around, I'll do it better. There's a nice word called craft. I mean, you don't need to say it's art or science, it's a craft. It's a beautiful craft.
Yeah, one more question is about what do you consider the most complicated things to translate in translating these works you have translated into Swedish, both in the linguistic level but also in the cultural level. I mean, what's this kind of transference between a culture to another to be able to make the public, the reader, understand what is the behind the story, those aspects. I mean, this is and one more question related to that could be, in that case, what are the most in a way the hugest transformation or even inevitable changes that you have to make in these works in order to be understandable as well in Swedish?
Okay, there were many questions at the same time, I think. Of course, you could come with a simple answer. There are so many expressions that you don't have in Sweden. That are difficult to translate or to explain, or should you have footnotes, or should you just leave them? That's the first part of the question. The other is, I'm trying to say, there are so many descriptions in Sepharad. There are so many very precise descriptions. And of course, if you describe something to me, I get a picture, I get a mental picture, and what I transform into paper is, of course, really at the end of the day it's my mental picture, not yours. I'm sorry. I have a small part that I would. It's not very long, that I would like to read, which in one way describes the very matter-of-fact description of things, and on the other, in this, which is just one long sentence, there are 4 different descriptions. It's the sentence of Berghoff, where you describe a table. You happen to remember it? No.
Oh yeah, the table with the guys.
Yeah.
Which side, please? Can you tell us the page?
Okay, 237 in the Swedish edition, of course. I haven't got the Spanish one. Det halvdunkla arbetsrummet, abstrakt som en cell, med vita väggar, trägolv, ett grovt stadigt skrivbord i trä, likt det bord som stod vid köken förr i världen, bordet i vårt kök när jag var barn. Platser blir till ekon, lager av genomskinliga bilder som rimmar med varandra med asketisk assonans. När jag går in i rummet vid denna obestämda timme en vinter eftermiddag kommer jag att tänka på rummet Garcia Lorca hade i Huerta de San Vicente och hans rum på studenthemmet i Madrid. Och från Madrid och Garcia Lorca för mig leken med överlagringar med platsernas assonans till Rom. Till rummet vid Academia de España där jag såg några nätter i mars eller april 1992. Och där jag föreställer mig långa, flitiga dagar av ensamhet och läsning. Klosterdagar i arbete och andlig frid. Den tillflykt man tycks ha inpräntad i själen, som man alltid drömmer om och letar efter. Rummet där det enbart finns några få grundläggande saker. Sängen, det nakna träbordet, fönstret, på sin höjd en liten hylla för några få böcker, inte för många. Och även en sån där bärbar musikanläggning som har en sällskap och nästan inte tar någon plats. Well, this is... I'm sorry you had to have this switch. This is such a, as you noticed, is such a precise description that it's all, I see those different rooms in my head, and what I describe, of course, are what I see. In a way, I sort of leave your room and go into mine.
You're entitled to.
Well,
Okay. If you please, I mean, if you want to add something to the discussion, it's like perfect. One more question then. In what aspects or part of those translations could we potentially follow the hands of the translator? I know that you said before that you wanted, yes, of course, but there is some aspect that where you had to at some point appear in a way, even if the intention of the good translator is to disappear behind.
I think that's very difficult, maybe impossible. There is an example in this that Elisabeth and I have been translating books together.
Yes.
Among them, Carlos Fuentes, Cristóbal Nonato, which is also a very thick one, and very fantastic book too. And we did about 5 or 6 books together. And it's impossible, during the work, of course, there were these fantastic talks all the time, and changes and discussions, but it's not possible for us, for either of us, to know which part is mine and which part is hers from the beginning. So, yeah, I don't know if that's, it's not an answer, but it's like an image.
One more, it will be about Beltenebros and Sepharad as 2 of the major works of Antonio Muñoz Molina, as the critics consider, you know. And those works, specifically those works, some other too, but at the same time, these two works as really related to Spanish history, contemporary history, I think, and memory as well, in that sense. Does this aspect, this connection with Spanish history, imply a major complexity when translating, specifically because the potential reader in Swedish maybe is not that aware about the Spanish history, and how the translator can solve this kind of possible obstacles?
I just think spontaneously that if you read a book like that or this, you are interested, and if you cannot follow or you begin to wonder, it's in that way with all the books. I think all books you read, if you don't know and you want to know more, you look for it and you try to get that knowledge. So I don't think that's a big problem, really. You know, you're reading a Spanish book.
But there might be another problem with Sefarad. You forced me into an academic lecture about a lot of people, a lot of historic events that I never ever had heard of before. And I thank God there is Google nowadays. I don't know what I had done before. I learned so much from that book, and of course, it's if my knowledge is faulting, the book will be faulting too. So I don't know if I learned enough. I can't tell you for sure. And another thing is, I think like Manni, you have to learn. There are certain, I think, here in Sweden, it's just people in our generation who would know who La Pasionaria was. She's completely forgotten by younger people, and she has a role in this book. And I didn't do anything to describe her. You have to find her. I say, like Manni, you have to find her yourself if you don't know who she is, for instance.
Well, this is something has to do with the author itself, with the writing, because sometimes you think, will this be understood? How many external references will the reader need to make sense of what he or she is reading? And I think that Americans, as in many other fields, have an enormous advantage, because they are involuntarily universal. We know everything about Americans, so they don't need to make an effort. They are quietly or leisurely universal. An American mentions New Jersey. Philip Roth writes about New Jersey. He's so. When you come from a provincial culture, somehow you have this complex of inferiority, because you think that you belong to a second-rate place in the world, to a second-rate culture, So you read when you are young, you read Faulkner, you read Philip Roth, and then you realize that they are even more provincial than you are. The only thing is that you say that you are walking down the Gran Via in Madrid, you are provincial. When you say you are walking down Broadway, you are universal. So this is a huge disadvantage. Or if you write you are walking down whatever is the name of the street we are on, So, this is a minor problem, but it's an irritating problem. So, what do you do? I think that as a writer, what I try to do is that the writing, the story, is as self-contained as possible. You try to put almost all the information within the book that the reader will need to understand it as a rule. In general, as you say, you get more interested and you do your research and you find out more things. And this has always been a way of learning, You read a Dr. Zhivago and you try to learn about Stalinism and the Russian Revolution and so on and so forth. But this is something that for me as a writer it has an enormous importance. How do you write something that works in a self-contained way, that can be read completely without external references? without external scaffolding, so to speak. No? You cannot do that, absolutely, but and the reader doesn't need to know that much in certain cases. No? Sometimes we think that the reader needs more information than he or she actually needs. No? Sometimes we packed too much information into books. No? The reader she doesn't need that much information. You have to select very carefully the information you are providing the reader. No? So it's a kind of a strategy. No? In some cases about the Passionaria, no? In some international editions of these novels, there are footnotes and that can be helpful. For example, in La Noche de los Tiempos, no? In the Night of Time, no? In France and the American and the English edition, I think in the German as well, they added some tiny footnotes and maybe a final cast of characters or something, no? But you actually don't need that much information because what you have to do is to plunge yourself in the book, no? And sometimes the information you don't have, you don't care about.
That is also an old discussion. If you want to put footnotes or not in a fiction and novel, for example, and yes, I think it's better without them.
Very well. One last question will be around the possible impact. If you know something about the impact of those translations into the Swedish context. I mean, specifically the critics, how they received those translations. If you have some information about that, could you just share it with us?
Yeah. I found an old critic of when Beltenebros came out in Swedish, and it was fantastic. I had forgotten about it. Yes, and he also says that the book was fantastic. He says, and also the translation. Yes, it's true because sometimes they don't mention that. Anyway, he also says that now we're waiting for El Invierno de Lisboa, Winter in Lisbon. So he's making space for the next book by you, which was fantastic to read. An old, very well made. Also, how they wrote about it in those times, 1991. But I don't know anything about how it's sold, so it's not really.
Well, it hasn't been come out yet. There hasn't been any critics of Separad yet, of course. But when I was working with this book, I was holding in my hand also the Danish translation, which was published some years ago. So it's very good when you're working with a book to have a friend translator from another language, this was the Danish book. You can check out if there is anything you wonder. It's like talking to an old friend. But I read the critics in Denmark, and they were overwhelming and very interesting. Apart from that, there were discussions on identical questions. That was what I was looking for. But I would like to say another thing, because when I was working with this book, people asked me, what are you working with? What kind of book is it? Well, I said, I don't know. It's not a novel. It's not it's not short stories. I don't know. And at the end of I came to the conclusion that it was a book like, I suppose you all know in Swedish, the Swedish book Om detta må ni berätta, from Forum för levande historia. It's a book made by the Swedish state in different languages for schools, where they tell about Swedish and the Jewish story during the war. And it's called, it's a Bible quotation. It's in English called Tell ye your children. And in Spanish, you can read it.
Esto contaréis a vuestros hijos.
And so, I don't know, but we would very, very much like to give you that book in the Spanish version.
This also has to do with a fantastic exhibition on the Cultural House right now. I saw yesterday, it's called Witnesses, talking about the importance of telling about as far as you can and as much as you can about your experiences. There are the people who are still alive, who are survivors from the extermination camps and concentration camps. And if you haven't seen it, go and see it. It's important and it's very well made.
Thank you for the info. I don't know if you want to read another fragment of you have decided to, because I think at the beginning we talked about that possibility, and I think it'd be great if we just hear you. Yeah, it could be really nice.
Just when I was doing this, it's like this one, and also the Winter in Lisbon. To me, they were like black and white films, very much, and about memory and different times in the memory. So I just read you a short. I will read it as it was. Man tror att platser och ansikten upphör att existera när man inte minns dem. Allt eftersom det exakta utseendet på den biograf där jag lärt känna Rebecca Osorio och Walter framträdde inför mina ögon i delar av sekunder, för taxin hade inte stannat än. Var det som om hela byggnaden reste sig på nytt ur spillrorna, dök upp i nuets natt och verklighet, precis som när ett fartyg lyfts ur havsdjupet av starka lyftkranar och stålvajrar. Jag sa åt chauffören att sätta av mig där. Mina händer trasslade in sig i fickornas väck när jag letade efter mynt. Jag gav dem till honom utan att räkna efter, av rädsla för att byggnaden skulle försvinna om jag tog ögonen från den. Taxichauffören sa något, men jag svarade inte. Jag gick framåt Universal Cinema och Universal Cinema och ser dem som i en solitär iscensättning av det förflutna, men den här gången hade jag inte en billig roman i handen som jag nyss köpt på stationen och ingen hemlig föresats att döda någon. En man hade dött några steg ifrån mig. Ett skott hade ljudit medan jag höll upp en tom hand i luften, som om den pistol jag inte ville använda hade hamnat hos mig i smyg. Och nu, för att allt skulle fullbordas, gick tiden baklänges som en film som körs åt andra hållet. Och jag tog på nytt del i förberedelserna inför Walters död.
I think Antonio wanted to add something to what you said before.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about your work, the work of translators. It's so important. So you have to. You're right. You had to be invisible in order to do a great translation. But this is also a punishment, because you are so invisible that people don't take notice of the work you've done. No? So sometimes you read in Spain a review of a novel by a translated novel, and there are no references at all to the work of the translator. No? And this is so offensive, no? Because, as you say early on, I mean, we owe so much to translation. We all have created our culture, or literary culture is done from translations. I mean, how many languages can we speak? How many languages can we actually manage, and control? So I have a friend who is a Spanish poet and editor, Birger Ferrer, who was my first editor. One day he called me on the phone and said to me, we were talking about this and that. He said to me, I've decided that I'm never going to read translations anymore. So, oh yeah. I only going to read original writing. So I'll only have German, French, English, Catalan, and Italian and Russian. Other than that, I'm not going to read anything. I said, good for you. except for this friend of mine. I mean, we all depend on your work, no? And it is so. And for me, over the years, it's been so important the interaction with translators. No, sometimes they have helped me. They have been great editors for me, because no one pays more closer attention to a book than a translator. It's a scary reader, no, because they pick every mistake. They pick every stupid thing you've written. No, I remember many years ago a book of mine which is a kind of historic narrative about Cordoba, the city of Cordoba in the Middle Ages, no, in the time of the Arabs, no, and it was a book that came out in 1990 and was published and translated over the years, and maybe 10 years later, my French translator called me and said to me, "You made this terrible mistake in your book." I said, "Which one?" Almost at the ending of the book, I mentioned the destruction of Pompeii, no? And I say that Pompeii was destroyed by an eruption from the Etna. And my friend said to me, "The Etna is in Sicily." So, for years, people have been reading and translating this book, and no one has paid the least attention to this terrible and ridiculous mistake. So, but there are so many examples, tiny examples, no questions translators ask you, and sometimes, I mean, translations are masterpieces in their own way. I remember one of the most beautiful translations I know is the translation of Montaigne essays into English. I don't remember now the name of the translator. It's from the 70s or something. And you read the French alongside the English, and the English is as good as the French. And there are also cases where the translation is much better than the original. Do you agree with me?
Then you're doing a mistake.
This is the little dirty secret of the trade. No? I mean, I know terrible books that have been dignified by a decent translation.
And of course, that is not really permitted, but it's done, I would say.
Maybe we should mention that there are 3 other translators from of your books into Swedish too. They couldn't come. Lena Heimann, Sofia von Malmborg och
Kerstin Kadelus.
Kerstin Kadelus. Just det. Kadelus. Så är det.
Yeah, thank you for recalling me. Well, this is any question that?
Yes, I want to.
Please, you go ahead.
There is one time when the work of the translator is not transparent, and it is when it's a bad translator. Because if you have a bad translation, at least myself, I get very distracted and I cannot read that book at ease. I just want to just throw it away. So if you are not visible, you are a good translator. The bad ones.
Questions to the authors or translators? Please.
You have to talk a little louder. I didn't hear. We didn't hear a question.
I wonder why most publishing houses don't write the name of the translator on the cover.
Okay.
And if that would help to recognize the job.
Well, are there any publishing houses here?
There is a you should ask our publisher. There is a publishing house in Spain, a very good one, Acantilado. They, as a matter of rule, they always put the name of the translator on the cover of the book.
Well, I'm from the publishing house. I published this book, Separado. It just recently came from La Imprenta. And we chose to do what we publishing houses in Sweden usually do. We put a note here, and actually we would put not only the name but also a few lines about what Elisabeth Helms has translated before and so. But there is also a trend in Sweden to put the name of the translator on the very cover. So that's might be something that we will consider later on. But the thing is, the second book that this publishing house has said it is translated by me, and I don't know, I didn't feel very comfortable on the cover. But maybe on our third published book we do so.
More questions? Comments? Oh. If not, I mean, we are just on time right now. I just want to mention once again that it's been a great privilege, I think, of course for me, but I think for all of us to be here today, I mean, attending this event, specifically because, as I said before at the beginning, Antonio Muñoz Molina represents one of the most prominent Spanish writers, contemporary Spanish writers, I think. Hopefully in the future, and that's my position as an academic, we can make some efforts to make him travel again to Sweden, but in this case to be awarded with a prize probably in the future. I mean, I think to me is is the first in the list. I'm talking as a reader today, as I said before. I don't want to talk as a research. It's not. I leave this for the university, and that embodiment is when I used to do that. But as a reader, I really hope that in the future, and this is the role of the academic, is to try to promote these options. You know how this works. And hopefully, I mean, of course, I mean, Antonio Muñoz Molina is one of the first in the list. I mean, talking about the Spanish case, and it's been also a privilege for having the opportunity to hear the Antonio Muñoz Molina voices in Swedish represented here by Malin and Elisabeth. It's been great also to hear them talking. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank as well to Gaspar Cano and Leonor for the invitation to be here today. It's been a pleasure, and I really thank you. And I thank you as well, the ambassador of Spain in Sweden, who's here today. And of course, Gaspar is telling me something, but I'm sorry. Sorry? Yeah. Okay, of course. Yes, of course. Sorry so much. And thank you so much as well, but this is something personal to my 5-year-old boy who's been here after the Vorschule. I convinced him to come because, as I said to him, you know, you're gonna meet a man who writes a lot of books. So he said, I'm so interested in meeting him. So he's here, absolutely patient, probably be bored, sorry, Antonio. It's too soon for him, but thank you all so much. Thank you, Antonio.